Good afternoon, Frank.
Hello, Professor.
I wonder what's on your mind this week with regard to globalization. But what has been uh, keeping me involved in globalization is watching the responses to the disaster in the Philippines.
Right,
And it seems to me to be quite remarkable that it's seen as a global issue. And more countries are responding, and everybody's criticizing everybody else for not responding enough.
hmm hmm
So the Chinese have upped their contribution from $100,000, which they offered in the first place,
Yes,
to
it's now up to like 1.6 million.
yeah, which I think
It's not
is
a great deal of money. Um, uh,
but the British and the Americans seem to be ahead of the Americans are ahead of everybody else, of course, and then next the British.
hmm hmm
But it's there seems to be a global awareness, a global feeling about this,
Right, right. Well,
and
I
whether
think,
that's
go
because
ahead.
everybody thinks we're all the same species and somehow belong to each other, or whether it's the fact that we think the next time it'll be us and and it's a response to global warming. I don't know.
Well, I think you may have touched on it with your second observation. There's a little bit of climate catastrophization going on. I mean,
Mhm.
when you read about the super typhoon Haiyan, or as it's known in the Philippines as Yolanda, when you read about it, and the second sentence says it is the strongest storm ever to make landfall in human history, that gets your attention, and that begins to cause that speculation that's ingrained in all of us as a result of all these Hollywood blockbuster movies. It's like, wow, maybe this is really happening now.
Yeah, and of course, human history doesn't go back very far.
No, well, measurable human history. Let's put it like that.
And of course, that nobody says just how far back that is. And there is interesting discussion about why the storms should be bigger, which are in enough detail to impress everybody who doesn't understand anything about this sort of thing to begin with, but leaves a lot of questions for those who might understand a little bit about it to begin with.
Yes, yes.
I mean, the media coverage of it is really very inadequate and is, I think, again, typical of globalization in that there's an enormous amount of gossip, but very little detailed
Mhm.
investigative journalism.
Right. Well, it's an unfortunate situation, fortunate or unfortunate, depending upon how you look at it. Because, for example, obviously, if the storm had hit a far more urbanized area or a more western type of area, it would have had amazing media coverage. For example, compare it to the St. Jude Day storm that went through England 2 weeks ago, or compare it to Superstorm Sandy last year. I mean, neither of those two storms held a candle to the level of this storm.
Yeah.
Now, in the Philippines, they're expecting that insured losses are going to be considerably below $100 million, which is not even going to register on the claim chart. If a storm like that had gone through the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, it would have been off the charts. People would have closed up.
Yeah, and this was 200 miles south of
Manila
Manila
and
and in an
and
inaccessible place.
well, the one city that was flattened, Tacloban City, had a quarter of a million people in it, and on the island of Leyte. But apparently, it was not a major center. I don't know how a town with a quarter of a million people cannot be a major center, but
Yeah, that was surprising, and I didn't understand that either. But also, the other thing that was reported that I thought was interesting was that the Philippine government seemed to have a remarkable amount of detail of statistical data that was
yes,
to it.
yes, they did. They actually had a number of dwellings that had been impacted. I mean,
And I wonder
again,
whether that's because of the censuses that they have developed in recent decades, or whether it's something that uh, is was set up by the colonial period that they went through and part of the infrastructure they were left with after the colonial period, as is the case in India, of course. Um, I wonder about that.
They could have just been making the numbers up too. I mean, for a long time, the death tolls were north of 10,000, and then now they're considerably under 10,000.
That's
So
right. It's gone down
I'm
to,
not so sure anybody has a clear idea as to exactly
but
what's
yes,
happened yet.
that's the number of people killed.
Correct.
And the statistical material that was impressive was the details that would have been known before the disaster
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
the area.
Mm-hmm.
So that suggests that even though it's a very isolated area, that in fact it had been covered in the normal administrative.
That's interesting. So they had a Philippine doomsday book. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So after all, the Philippines is not. They're not a nationality or a country that ranks very high in any sort of list of interesting countries and among the members of the United Nations. So it's impressive in a way that there should have been such good response to the difficulties that they're having, and interest in and in fact a sense of urgency to do something for them as fast as possible.
That's a good point, actually, because it remains one of the main stories in the U.S. media. It's still on the front page of the newspaper.
Yeah,
So
yeah. A
that's a
week
good point. Yeah,
later.
yeah.
I didn't. Well, no. There have been other things to report on as well, like polio in Syria, and
Yes, yes. And then now vaccinations for polio in Pakistan.
yeah, well,
Yeah,
throughout the Middle East.
right,
Um,
right.
I mean,
And then of course the breakdown in the talks in Geneva,
mhm.
the supposed breakdown.
Well, that's very interesting, and of course I there's a lot that I have been saying to friends about that, but that I hesitate to say too publicly because one doesn't really know who was saying what to whom. But it does seem as though there was a considerable intrusion into the P5+1 by certain people who were not members of the P5+1. And whether it was because of the French interest in a state visit to Israel and possible economic rewards for that, I don't know. But
Interesting.
it's everybody seems to think that the agreement is still going to come. It's just a question
Yes,
of the amount of time.
yes. What have you gathered from what is possibly happening in Saudi Arabia? The level of unemployment among Saudi citizens, Saudi nationals, is 12.5%, which is apparently quite high. Now, the Saudi government, in reaction to that, has taken a very hardline approach to migrant workers to ensure that everybody is properly documented. And if they're not documented, they're going to be sent home. Now, approximately 10 or 11,000 workers have already been sent home, and the Saudi police are vigorously pursuing migrant workers to check their documents. A number of migrant workers presumably don't have documents. Civil strife has broken out. 7 people have been killed in a neighborhood of Riyadh. But this is all supposing that somehow those jobs that these migrant workers currently occupy are going to be taken by Saudi citizens, which is a little difficult for me to believe. I mean, the migrant workers in Saudi Arabia work almost in an untouchable class configuration as in India. Are Saudi citizens going to pick up garbage and mow lawns and do whatever they do? I don't think so.
It's a very interesting situation, and I should first say that I haven't lived in Saudi Arabia, and so I'm not sure how things work there. But I would expect to find that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, or KSA as it's now referred to, was set up in the 1930s on the model of pre-modern Islamic political entities.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of it being a Western bureaucracy was something that it came into being adopted after the Second World War, when it began to become part of the oil economy. And I suspect that it's still not the bureaucracy is still not very efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And the economy is the Saudi family, and I haven't seen a count of just exactly how many members that they have, but they're all very wealthy. and a lot of other people who are somehow taken care of, but don't really need serious employment. And then there probably are some people who get left out,
Yes.
and that's the problem. And since there is now a big uncertainty about the succession, I think Saudi Arabia is on the verge of a difficult period, which is one of the reasons why they're helping the government of Bahrain a great deal, and also the Egyptian government, to maintain the old system of rule in those countries, because they feel that the more things change in other countries, the more at risk they'll be in their own.
Oh, of course. Yes. Yes.
So there's been some discussion in some media outlets about the chances of survival of all the emirate rulers, and they're holding on very carefully. And some of them, of course, are doing a good job, and others are doing not very much at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Saudi Arabia is a little bit of a litmus test for the globalization phenomena. I've always thought that. I mean, it strikes me as absurd to think that that regime is going to be able to remain in power with the cooperative power structure that they've negotiated with the Sunni leadership there. I mean, they're working hand. Excuse
What
me.
to the oil economy if it doesn't?
Well, there's so many pressure points here. For the month of October, for the first time in years, the United States produced more oil than it imported, which is sort of a big news event. All right. And if I'm in Saudi Arabia, I'm looking at that and I'm scratching my head going, wow, that's not good. I mean, the second thing is that Saudi Arabia, I mean, they may know internally, but officially, their census data is very, very poor. They can't give an exact count as to how many people are in the country. And for whatever reason, but I suspect a significant amount of that might be due to the migrant worker condition. And I also think that to the extent that the people begin to communicate more, I mean, even before the advent of the internet, they were having social difficulties there amongst Saudi citizens themselves. I mean, just in this past month, there have been a whole spate of articles about Saudi women wishing to drive. And I mean, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I don't see how they're going to be able to hold on.
No. The driving situation, or maybe one should say the gender situation, can't last, and the position of the Saudi family can't last. But it really is part and parcel of what's going on in the Middle East as a whole, and it's in a way it's strange that Saudi Arabia is doing its best to hold on to to bolster the opposition in Syria, when what it needs is to be surrounded by rulers like Assad.
Yes, yes, that's exactly right.
So I think they are beginning to have difficulty in working out just exactly what they should be supporting. And the fact that they seem to have some sort of agreement about nuclear collaboration with Pakistan, one wonders how desperate they actually are.
Hmm. Well, it's going to be very interesting because, I mean, clearly, for as much oil as the Americans are now producing, the Chinese still continue to buy every drop that's out of the market.
Yes, and
So,
America is not going to be self-sufficient in oil for a while yet.
right, right.
Uh,
Now,
But
go ahead.
well, it's the relation. You're right to draw attention to the fact that the larger situation has to do with the relationship between America and China in the world economy.
Hmm. May I ask you a question? Are you following events in Cairo?
Well, up to the extent that it's possible to follow them, yes.
Hmm. So obviously you're aware of Morsi's comments whenever he gets near a microphone, and then
Yeah,
secondly the pending visit of the Russian ambassador or the
yeah,
Russian foreign minister.
yeah.
Strange goings on.
But nobody from outside Egypt seems to be supporting Morsi.
No.
And it's not clear what is going on behind the scenes with America, between
Mm-hmm.
America and Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel that's why I said what I said, because I feel there must be a lot going on that we just don't know about. And so it's difficult to tell. I suspect that there's going to be some surprises in the coming weeks.
Well, I think the American relationship with the Egyptian military is very strong, between the Pentagon and the Egyptian military. I think that
But the Egyptian military trying to make sure that they have a replacement for that if they need one.
well, perhaps so. But I mean, I think over the years there's been a very good coordination. I've seen a number of articles about that.
Yeah.
And
But after all, it was the Russians who were supporting Egypt 50 years ago.
yes, oh yes, yeah.
Uh,
They built the Aswan Dam,
yeah.
which is one of the few things that they built that still works. So hasn't cracked and crumbled. So now let me ask you this: what about the plenum in Beijing?
Yes.
That sort of was a little bit of a non-event in some ways, but on the other hand, President Xi managed to put together that national security apparatus just in one
Well,
fell swoop.
it looks as though they did what was expected, but we don't know the real details yet.
Hmm.
To the extent that they're going to uh, do something about the property rights of farmers.
Well, I think they punted on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
would be an enormous change.
Yes.
That would really be the end of the communist system, leaving nothing but the party.
Well, look what happened when Lenin tried it with the new economic plan
Yeah,
back in 1921 when he gave back the limited property rights. That essentially threw Marx out the window.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Now, are you following what's going on in North Korea with Kim Jong Un and the mass executions?
But I know what's happened, but I don't understand the significance of it at the moment.
Well, apparently, Reuters carried a little comment deep in one of the articles that there are strong rumors that he was the victim of an assassination attempt in August. And
Yes, I've seen that.
yeah, there's some theory that it may have been prompted or organized by an element in the army, and that since then his security has been immensely bolstered. So I guess the thinking is that whatever happened, to the extent anybody knows what happened, that it was a little bit of a warning shot to anybody who dared oppose him.
Uh, it is interesting because one would have expected that it would be difficult for a 30-year-old or somebody perhaps possibly even younger than that to easily succeed his father when it was the army which was really what the country's stability depended upon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And maybe he hasn't managed to come up to their expectations, though who they would replace him with, of course, one can't imagine.
No, no.
Uh,
Very, very, very strange goings on over there. So, anything else on your mind?
I think we've covered the main things for the past week, and even if just some of them develop in the coming week, we'll have plenty to talk about next Thursday.
You're on. All right, Professor. Thank you very much.